Justification, a guide to self-deception. How we lie to ourselves and believe it. Ever been in a conversation with someone and they say something that immediately has you thinking, this person is absolutely delusional or they're definitely lying to themselves? To you, it's so clear. It's like, how can they be so blind as not to see the absurdity of their statement? This is because of your perspective, the vantage point you're looking at things from. You're seeing things from an outsider's point of view and not taking into account the interference arising from inside the person's mind and all the person's subjective internal factors that give birth to justification and self-deception. Factors such as the person's state of mind, belief, and, more importantly, their dominant thoughts, motivations, and desires often overpower logic and reason in such moments. These factors are easily overlooked and disregarded because they're not visible to the naked eye. They're not out in the open as they exist inside of the person's mind. We forget that it is the foundation of our reality, and we forget the mind is where perceptions and reality form. It is where all the action takes place. The thing about this blind spot is its universality. Every human being on Earth falls victim to this trap. What's interesting about it is very easy for us to observe these justifications and self-deceptions in others. When looking from an outsider's perspective, however, it is almost impossible for us to have those same observations in our own behaviors with all our internal interferences. Therefore, we assume we don't fall for the same trap because we can't see our own internal interferences, motivations, and desires. Think about it. In the last 30 days alone, how often did you pass judgments such as, he's delusional, she's lying to herself, and it's clearly not going to happen, on statements you heard from friends and random people alike? And then think about how many times you passed the same judgments on statements you made to someone or promises you made to yourself. Statements that you know now in hindsight were clearly delusional or lies you were telling yourself. This happens more often than we realize or care to admit. Justification is a slimy and deceptive, irresistible serpent, which is why it's almost impossible to recognize and guard against. It is so subtle and tempting, often happening in the moment, and it usually offers some sort of relief, reward, or satisfaction. We justify and self-deceive for guilty pleasures and immediate gratification, and also concerning more significant issues, such as the maintenance of a false self-image or a broken value system to avoid the pain of facing reality. It's like a get-out-of-jail-free card. Putting it plainly, there is no shortage of motivation and incentive for justification and self-deception. Generally, the truth is subjective. The idea of what is true depends on many factors, such as the person's belief system, their mentality, their experiences in life, the environment they grew up in, and so forth. But ultimately it boils down to you, the individual. Taking all the above factors into consideration, add to that the fact that our truths may appear definite and certain in the mind, but that is often not the case. Our beliefs and truths are held in the mind in varying degrees of certainty, with core truths being the ones that have been corroborated by our experiences, and other beliefs and truths are secondary, because they have also been called into question by our experiences in life. It would appear that more often than not, what we believe to be true in every given situation is circumstantial. It's based on many factors that can easily swing the other way under the right conditions. Everything is true under the right circumstances, and if you, the individual, want something to be true, the mind will create situations and present you with circumstances where you'd see what you want to see. This is how the mind functions. It works with the orders and input we give it, regardless of whether in reality those orders and inputs are true or not, or right or wrong. Let us further explore these ideas from different perspectives and see how easily the waters can get muddied, creating the perfect playground for justification and self-deception. Firstly, it is important to point out that some truths are considered universal truths, or at the very least, they are shared beliefs that spread throughout the world. But even those truths start to crumble when they come under scrutiny, especially when viewing them from both a personal and an outsider's perspective. For instance, take a statement like, "It is wrong to commit murder." This is a statement I believe almost everyone in the world believes to be true. Let us bring it under scrutiny and see if it holds water. Objectively, the above statement has such a universal consensus that throughout history, it has been codified in the laws of so many countries throughout the world, but even in the language of the law, it is said that for every general rule, there is an exception. This means that even though it is wrong to commit murder, it can be justified in the right circumstances such as self-defense, cases of mistake and negligence, or even in the execution of a sentence. So the same truth we all know and believe with certainty and conviction, to the extent we've made it a universal law, can change in different circumstances. Now, when you look at how the same statement and idea are interpreted from a subjective perspective, 16. When it is from your personal point of view with all the internal interferences we've discussed above, this is where you open a whole can of worms. This is because in the mind, reality is viewed through the veil of internal interferences. Factors such as beliefs, experience, environment, and the person's state of mind, the dominant thoughts, ideas, motivations, and fears, all affect how the information in the mind is processed and perceived, regardless of whatever preconceived notions a person might previously hold. Whenever these factors come into play, everything is justifiable. We can find examples of this phenomenon throughout history. For instance, centuries ago, normal people who believed in the sanctity of life would, under different circumstances, willingly offer themselves and their children up for sacrifice to the gods because of their beliefs at that point in time. Furthermore, in times of war, both the soldiers and normal people from different walks of life who join the army on both sides of the conflict commit the most heinous crimes, and justifying it by blaming one another for being the cause, regardless of their preconceived ethical and moral positions. These are all examples of situations where normal, everyday people who believe in the sanctity of human life and probably have never physically hurt anyone before succumb to the illusion of justification to the point where they end up committing the most heinous crime of all, murder, and if that can be justified, then everything else can also be. Now, let's take a look at other everyday situations where justifications are provided that we've all used as excuses and are more commonplace in our society today. For instance, when you justify lying to someone by telling yourself, "I'm doing it to protect him," or they're not ready for the truth. When you're trying to buy something you can't afford and say things like, "I'll cut back on my spending," knowing damn well you're not going to. When you're trying to have something you know it's not good for you, you'll say, "Well, it's just this one time." And when we justify doing things we don't necessarily agree with by saying, "If I don't do it, someone else would," or "I had no choice, everyone else is doing it." A person who thinks he's tough will always justify situations where he's scared or chickens out, and a person who thinks he's good will justify his evil as a necessity of someone else's fault. Although some factors behind their reasoning and excuses may be valid, nonetheless, the main reason behind such justifications is to ultimately make them feel good about themselves and to avoid the guilt and disappointment of deviating from the standard they set for themselves or their fragile self-image. In other words, justification is a necessary tool we employ to achieve internal consistency and maintain harmony between our beliefs and behaviors. The human being is an organic machine that is both physical and mental. The mental aspect is the operating system. The mind is the main engine that creates our reality. This is a combination of our thoughts, ideologies, motivations, and emotions. All these factors come together to form the foundation of how we perceive our identity and physical reality. Whenever there's a conflict of beliefs that threatens our ideals and self-perception, we are knocked out of alignment and develop mental disharmony. Depending on the severity of the disharmony, it affects the mind like a physical disease, leaving the individual discouraged, demotivated, and extremely uncomfortable until it is rectified or justified. This phenomenon is recognized psychologically. It was popularized by the psychologist Leon Festinger, who coined the term cognitive dissonance. This is when a person has two contradictory ideas or beliefs that clash with one another, and our efforts to maintain internal harmony and consistency in such predicaments are often the reason for our justifications and self-deceptions. Justifications are arguably most dangerous when they affect issues that are tied to our desires and immediate gratification, individual perceptions, identity, and motivations. Take, for instance, the insecure kid with crippling social anxiety because they have been subject to a life of isolation with very little social human interaction, who, instead of immersing themselves into social environments with regular human contact and interactions, tries to cure their anxiety. They opt for the path of least resistance and justify their situations with statements like, "It's my personality," I'm a loner, or I'm antisocial. Furthermore, consider a struggling actor trying to make it in Hollywood, who instead of doubling their efforts after a few unsuccessful auditions, says it's impossible to make it in Hollywood without joining the Illuminati, or a poor person saying they don't want to make money because it's the root of all evil. These justifications are significant enough to alter the course of a person's life and identity as a whole. They are imaginary chains we use to lock ourselves up. We close chapters of possibilities from a large part of our experience that we automatically write off without trying hard enough or making the effort to achieve the accomplishments. In this way, justification is not just a get-out-of-jail-free card. It is also a you-don't-have-to-try card. There are countless examples where people justify their actions not because it's the right course of action or even the truth, but because it's the path of least resistance and the quickest way to avoid the crippling guilt and disappointment of mental disharmony and maintain that inner peace and harmony, despite it being superficial. It is important to note that justification is like putting a Band-Aid on an open wound. It only offers up a momentary relief and covers the surface of the wound. However, I do not cure it. Rather, whatever is justified is tucked away deep inside the mind where it accumulates, and if not properly addressed, it turns into a full-blown delusion or worse. It affects the person's foundational belief system and destroys their whole identity, leaving a person completely lost, dissociated, and dysfunctional. There is a thin line between being on the right path and being on a path of less resistance. This line is called justification.